Firstly, thanks very much to Tyndall for inviting me along to speak today. I've been learning a lot from the other speakers' presentations on sensor technologies, and I'm not sure if I'll return the favour, so thanks very much for that insight. So my topic is data-driven decision-making in animal health. But first, a little bit about Zoetis. So some of you may have heard of Zoetis, others not. We're actually the world's largest animal health company. We used to be Pfizer Animal Health until about 7 or 8 years ago. We spun off and created our own company, Zoetis. And we look after pretty much any area of animal health you can think of. So all the species, and we provide obviously the core products in vaccines, pharmaceuticals, but also adjacent spaces such as diagnostics, genetics, biosensors, and precision livestock farming technology. So just a little bit about me is probably give you some context about the kind of topic of my presentation today. I'm a dairy vet. If you hadn't noticed the accent, I'm from Australia. So I worked as a dairy vet in Australia as a clinical vet, and then worked for Zoetis Australia in the field, and mainly worked with dairy cows and did a residency in dairy medicine. So my background is dairy cattle and cattle in general. And so the focus of this talk will be specific to dairy, but is certainly transferable to other livestock species and other animal health portfolios as well. I work in outcomes research, and so for those of you who haven't heard this term, it's essentially applied research. So outcomes research evaluates the economic, clinical, and quality of life outcomes of healthcare interventions to inform decision making. And so our team in Zoetis worked with the marketing and technical teams to identify meaningful value propositions for our products and then generate robust supporting evidence. So we're creating, essentially it's in-field applied research to develop supporting value evidence for our products and then creating and communicating that to our teams. So in the context of sensors and in the context of precision livestock farming, my role is to help create research, applied research that demonstrates the value. So what's the benefit of these tools once they're actually applied in a real life setting? And that hopefully gives some context of what I want to talk about today. So perhaps an alternative title is data-driven decision-making in animal health and some practical considerations for implementation of PLF technology on farms. So, so you see, these are some of the things I've gleaned from working in outcomes research and in particular in the ruminants and precision livestock farming portfolio after the last couple of years. And so hopefully it's obvious because a lot of the presenters today are probably working in the R&D field, whereas I'm very much in the applied field. So I'm hoping that some of these lessons from application can be relevant in the development pipeline as well. So when I talk about precision livestock farming, just to define, precision livestock farming is the management of livestock farming by continuous automated real-time monitoring, managing of production and reproduction, health and welfare of livestock and environmental impact. Or in other words, I like to say it's using data to make decisions, and more with sensors and other technologies using precise data to make precise decisions. So what can we measure? And thanks to Mike Overton for this slide. And also Christina from the previous session discussed some of the sensors that are available and some of the things that we can measure. But the answer is, pretty much anything. If we can stick a sensor on a cow somewhere, we can measure an output. And so there's a lot of physiological measurements we can take. For example, heart rate, rumen pH. We can also take temperature, but behavioural things like activity, lying, standing behaviour. Production components such as milk yield and content, health indicators such as mastitis, rumination, feed and water intake. But the question is, once we've measured it, what do we do with it? And that's the value in the sensor systems that we have is actually in the decisions, the management decisions that we take based on the data we collect from the sensors, not on the sensor data themselves. So it's really about the decisions we make. So as the topic of this session suggests, sensors are part of a system. And I just wanted to show this screen here is just an overview of a project that we're involved with Tyndall. So we're partners with Chagos and Tyndall and TWSG in a Demeter project, which is an EU funded project. And the overall aim of the project is to develop an automated cow welfare health scoring system using inputs from not only just sensors, but also other data inputs from dairy farms. So while sensors are a very important part of this component, and there's accelerometers, so a Zoetis smart bow ear tags are part of this, as well as pedometers and sensors from automatic milking systems. We also have inputs from herd management software, so data that the farm has entered themselves, so health event data, production data, milking management software. And the key part here is this processing, analytics, and visualization to take all of these disparate inputs and actually create actionable insights out of them. And hopefully the end result is that we have some useful automated welfare assessment, which would be a really valuable tool for the industry. And I've also borrowed this slide from Dr. Mike Overton, my colleague in Zoetis, but I really like the way that this shows the integration of different data sources to help drive decision making on farms. So you've got some sensor data here. So for example, cow location, rumination, milk conductivity, activity might all come from a sensor, but not all of this data comes from sensors. So genomic data, cow information, health events, weather information, market conditions, these all come from different sources. And the ideal goal, so this is certainly not a reality yet, but the ideal goal is that we have a centralized integrated hub for all of this information to feed into, which would then get processed, run through complicated machine learning algorithms and actually export decision support tools. So for example, some of the decisions you can make that are actually of value to a farm based on this information, estrus alerts. So when should I breed a cow? Feeding management, monitoring feed intake of individual animals and herd level feed management. Disease alerts. So does this cow need to be looked at? Has she potentially got a health problem? Calving alerts. Does this cow need assistance calving? Is there any issues with the ventilation management of the shed? Resource optimization, so feed, fertilizer, water, land, economic projections, decision support around whether or not you should cull or an animal and replace her with a new one. And then also, as we mentioned in the Demeter project, automated welfare assessment. So herein lies the value of all of these sensors that we talk about and these exciting new technologies. The value is the decisions that we can make with them after we incorporate them into real life systems. And so, the trick here, or the important thing here, is to find the intersection between biology versus engineering. So, I'm a biologist, I'm a vet. I would never pretend to understand the things that you guys have been talking about today with respect to the development of sensors. And then it works in the other way around too, where people that are involved in developing sensors may not have as good an understanding of what happens on farm and biological systems. So this intersection between biology and engineering is critical, and finding ways to bridge that gap is critical to success of precision livestock farming technologies going forward. And I've just got this picture here. It's just a little bit of a plug for a partnership that Zoetis has with the University of Veterinary Medicine, Vienna, which is just, this partnership has just commenced recently in this year. And we're working as part of their PLF hub, as part of the partnership. We've actually just gone through the process of interviewing postdocs and actually finding the right postdoc position or the right person to meet the role responsibilities was quite difficult, because they had to cover across, they needed to understand data analysis and computer programming and machine learning, but they also needed to understand farming systems and animal science. So it was tricky, but I think we found the right person. So so with that, I'd like to segue into some of my insights on practical considerations for the implementation of PLF technology. And this is by no means exhaustive, and I enjoyed the conversation in the Q&A from the last session where we talked about some of these things, and so there might be a little bit of repetition here. I apologize, but So first things first, I think this is really important. You know, does the new technology, does the sensor, does it meet an unmet need? Or is it just a solution looking for a problem? And I think we get this a fair bit, where there might be some new technology that works well in a different system, maybe transport or even in precision agriculture versus livestock farming, and we just assume that it will work on a livestock farm and a dairy farm, for example, and it doesn't necessarily. And I think one of the ways around this, and Alan mentioned design thinking and what's the problem statement in the Q&A, is really we need to go to the stakeholders. So we need to go to the farmers, we need to go to the milk purchasers, the processors, and the consumers, and identify what are the value drivers, what are the unmet needs, and what existing solutions are there already to address these unmet needs. And there's examples of where there's already good existing solutions, and we've tried to introduce a new technology that doesn't actually address an unmet need because the need has been met already. And so we need to look at what are the unmet needs, what gaps are there, and then we can generate the innovative solution proposals to meet these unmet needs. So I think this is really important, is bringing it back to square one and saying, do we actually need this solution? And then here's the obvious one, you know, cost. This is the first question that farmers ask. Any presentation I've given to a group of farmers, the first thing they ask is, well, how much is it? And that's you know, completely understandable. They're running a business, and therefore they're not going to install something that's not going to return on investment. But I've also put value here, and the reason I've got a picture of a tractor here is because you know, cost is not the only value driver for farmers. It's not the only thing that drives purchasing decisions, and there's a whole, you know, behavioral economics story here. But if you look at, for example, the tractor, I'm sure there's plenty of farmers that will spend an extra 50,000 euro on a tractor because it might be green versus red or blue, and that's certainly not anything to do, you know, anything to do with functionality. There's other underlying themes at play, and so I think value is important. So there's technologies that might not necessarily be a return on investment, but it could allow, for example, the farmer to have more time to spend with their family. So it could be a labor saving thing, or it could be something that's been required of them by the milk purchaser, by the regulator. Something, for example, like a diagnostic to prove that the antibiotic they're using is appropriate, and that might be something that is not a returning on investment, but they value it because they need to do it to remain to retain access to the market. But yes, obviously, if something's too expensive to even get a place in the farm in the first place, then it's not going to work. Practicality. So there's lots of examples of practicality, and we did discuss. There was some discussed in the previous Q&A. I've just got this example. I haven't mentioned the name of the product or anything like that. I'm not wanting to sort of speak ill of the product. It is a product that's available for measuring calving prediction in dairy cattle, and it does quite a good job at telling the farmer when they need to go and check a cow. But one of the issues was that it was mounted to the tail, and it measured the activity of the tail. But in a study that that recently was published from Germany, they actually found that a lot of the sensors would fall off, and also the sensors would cause damage to the tail where they were attached. They would cause swelling, pain, and sometimes necrosis. And so the problem is then, you know, there becomes a critical point where if the farmer's spending a lot of time replacing tags, or if there's injured animals, then the commercial value of the product significantly drops off, and that's something to consider. You know, it's relevant to things like ear tags and collars and leg tags as well, that they'll actually work and be robust enough on farm. Another example of this is, and it was mentioned actually in the Q&A about entering the food chain. So implants, for example, I've seen were approached by a company that had a surgically implanted sensor that went under the skin and measured some really interesting things, but it was about the size of a tennis ball, and there's no way a farmer's going to pay for surgery to install even one of those sensors, let alone 100 or 1,000. And then there's the later question is, well, will that implant even be allowed because it's potentially going to accidentally enter the food chain? Another issue with practicality is the sampling media for diagnostic sensors, and we've sort of gone through this a little bit with the projects we're running with Tyndall and for Demeter, is that, you know, we can create a new diagnostic sensor array that works really well and is highly sensitive and specific. But if you have to collect a blood sample or a urine sample every time you want to run it on farm, then it detracts from the commercial value. So convenience is really important here, and obviously if you can collect it from milk in a dairy cow, that's perfect. And there are already inline sensors that automatically collect milk and run a number of assays for different things. And also, I think sampling preparation was mentioned. If you have to collect milk and then culture it before you can run the test, then, you know, that's going to be an extra inconvenience that the farmer might not want to do on farm. And then also, this was mentioned in the discussion around connectivity and battery life. Some of these systems need to process the data with the algorithm on farm, on server on farm, which is fine. But some need to upload it to the cloud where the algorithm lives, and there's not every farm is going to have that sort of Wi-Fi connection to be able to run that. Obviously, that changes as you know, as we move into the world of 5G, and that will improve. But it's certainly something to consider, that farms are often in remote regions with poor connectivity. And then the other issue around battery life is, you know, you can't connect an ear tag to a cow and then recharge her every night. It has to stay in there for at least 12 months to be commercially viable. So that has to be considered as part of the design thinking process as well. Sensitivity versus specificity. Obviously, when we're developing a new sensor technology, we want to make sure it's highly sensitive and highly specific. But what's the actual implication of low sensitivity or specificity? If you've got a health alert system, for example, and you have low sensitivity, then you're going to miss too many cases of disease. So you'll have an empty yard, you know, you won't have to check many cows, but unfortunately those cows will still be in the shed or out in the paddock getting sicker before you actually find them, and that defeats the purpose of having the technology. And if you have low specificity and have too many false positives, then what you're going to have is a cow full of a yard full of cows that need to be checked every day because they've come up as a health alert, and a lot of them won't be sick. And that's again defeats the purpose of the technology, because it's supposed to be time saving and not time adding. So I just want to finish with this: factors affecting adoption. This is a paper written for the Journal of Dairy Science. I just thought it was gave a nice overview. So relative advantage is, so for factors affecting adoption of precision dairy monitoring technologies, is the new solution better than the current solution? And so if there's already an existing solution, and I touched on this before, then, you know, is this even meeting an unmet need? Compatibility, and so this is not, I'm not talking about interoperability or compatibility with software here, but is it compatible with current industry needs? So is there a demand in the industry? Is it appropriate for the time? So an example being the welfare assessment tool is something that the industry is values highly at the moment, an automated welfare assessment tool, and so that's compatible. Complexity. Farmers are very busy people, and they don't need extra complexity to their life. They're already juggling many different roles in their business, and so if something's difficult or complicated, they won't want to use it. Trialability. So can you install something cheaply and easily and trial it on a limited basis, or does it require a big infrastructure commitment? Will affect adoption. And observability. So what this means is actually farmers tend to take the opinion of other farmers over all else, and that's been proven in multiple studies. And so if the results of the technology are visible to other farmers, then it actually improves adoption. So if other farmers can see that this technology is making a difference to your farm, and then they're more likely to adopt it. And so just a little cautionary tale to wrap up. I think I've got just enough time. So we don't just want technology for technology's sake. It's great to have lots of new tools and sensors and gadgets, but we need to remember sometimes we don't necessarily need it. So legend has it that NASA scientists spent years and millions of dollars to develop a pen that could write in space without gravity, and actually the Russians just took a pencil. So, you know, so I like that tale, but actually in preparing for this presentation, I read up on it, and apparently it's not 100% true. So apologies for that, but I still like the message. And so here's a true story from animal science and from dairy precision livestock farming, which tells the same story. So we have a product called VetScan DCQ that is a differential somatic cell count diagnostic, and it's an excellent tool and very good at telling you whether or not a cow has subclinical mastitis and in which quarter it is. It hasn't been a huge commercial success, and the reason for that is because there is already a pre-existing solution. So you can use the milk recording that the farmer's already doing to work out whether a cow has a high cell count, and then use this simple detergent-based paddle to tell you whether or not which quarters are infected. And it's just an example of where the rubber meets the road with new technologies. So, and then last slide. Apparently, what actually happened with the space pen was that it wasn't millions of dollars that NASA spent, but actually a private company that developed the space pen. So there was an unmet need, because pencils actually aren't great in space because they're flammable, and they actually also break off little bits of graphite which float around the spacecraft, which is not ideal. So there was a need for a space pen, and NASA bought these pens off Fisher company, and apparently the Russians did too. So there you go. So thank you very much for my time and for your time, sorry, and I look forward to the Q&A.